And then the main reason we can do this is because we've opened up that entire area, that entire API layer that sits on top of the service is now completely public and documented. So all our UI, all our controls use a public interface. Before we had some vendors that had done some connection managers and they'd reverse engineered some of the UI, some of the interfaces, which is fine, but those interfaces weren't designed to have multiple clients talking to them, so you do get cases on XP where there's some instability. In Vista, we try to make sure that's open, so it doesn't matter how many wireless clients you've got running, they'll all see the same information. This is just an example of the Media Center UI. I'm not really going to do UI demos. You can pick up the CD and look at it yourself. The only one I wanted to kind of say was if you are connecting to an unsecure network, I talked about what happens if you click through and you're not paying attention. You just really want to get it connected. All that UI that's coming up is just stuff that's in your face and getting between you and connectivity. We want to make sure that when you get to that last point, you're actually going to have the most secure defaults we can find. You connect to an unsecured network, but we're not going to connect back to it by default. If you just hit close or cancel or next, we're going to have a default set of settings. If you really want to go back and order connection, you actually have to do it implicitly. Another kind of interesting UI that is new for Vista is this kind of categorization of networks. So Abelardian has talked about network location awareness. So whenever we see a new network, we're actually going to take effectively a fingerprint of that network, and we're going to store that away, and we're also going to ripple it up to the user. So that there are 3 categories of networks. First one is a domain network, and in that case, we actually have to do a secure authentication to domain controller. But then there are also unmanaged networks, and you can classify them in 2 ways. You can classify them as public or private. That information gets stored away with the network, and every time the network gets connected, that information is rippled up to any system service or application that's interested in those kind of events. So they'll get the information about whether it's intranet or internet capable, and it'll get this kind of classification information. So you'll see work and home, they both map to private, and the default is public. So again, if you cancel out of that, it will see public. The typical kind of applications that are built in that listen for this kind of information are things like the Media Center. If you're at home, it'll open up some discovery ports and it'll look for things like Xbox extenders. You don't really want it to do that at Starbucks. And the another one is the firewall, where again, if you're in a public setting, the firewall will be locked down into its most restricted setting. One other interesting UI is this network and sharing center. This just gives you a really quick look at just what your kind of common exposure is. If you're doing printer sharing, what file shares you've got open, what's been exposed off the box. So it's a kind of quick snap view where you can get an idea of what your exposure is at any time. Another area is we've added command line. I'll show that because it's easier. So in Abelardi's talk again, he mentioned the net shell, which is our command line. It's basically a shell for network commands. You can dive pretty deep into it, and it allows you to extend it with new context. So for all of the networking technologies, there's a net shell context. You can look at the IP stat, you can look at the HTTP server, you can look at the firewall, and you can look at settings and you can make configuration calls. So we have a new context called WLAN. A bunch of different things I can do in this. For example, I can take a look at what the drivers are. I can look at profiles. I can also take a deeper look at a profile. So if I want to see actually, I haven't got used to typing on this keyboard yet.
Oh, it's BlackHat.
So this will give you a kind of more human readable version of what you see in that XML file. I can also do things I can look at networks. So this will just give me a quick view of all the networks I can see. And if I want more rich information, I actually want to see the access points, again, I can call that with a different mode. And now I see information about all the access points as well. So this is the kind of information you might see in something like NetStumbler or Kismet. It's just built into the command line now, so you can get a quick view wherever you are. So if you have a machine that doesn't have any tools on, you can still get this kind of information. Other things I can do is I can import and export profiles. And if you're an Uber geek, you can actually connect and disconnect from networks at the command line. And the last thing you can really do here is you can enable and disable tracing. We now have a really rich tracing information that gets stored away. It's kind of useful for application developers, and kind of help desk, or even for forensic information. And later on, Tarun will show you some ways of viewing that. So obviously there's an open API set, so you pretty much can do anything we can do. Connection managers, site surveys, easy connect applications, whatever you want to build at that layer, that API set's now exposed. Because we have now integration with NetShell, this is command line, you can actually script there, so you can actually run scripts down there and control configuration of machines through scripting. And finally, if you have written one of those IHV extension DLLs, so you've got your own customized security or connection management going on at the service layer, you can expose stuff up into the UI. So you can add tabs and pages into our UIs, you can add elements into some of our drop-downs. So there's quite a lot of richness in how you can customize the standard Vista experience. So there's a layer of commonality for users. If they've used one machine, it will look similar on a different machine. But each vendor or OEM can actually have some extensions there for the additional security methods they want to expose.
So I'm going to talk about a little bit more about the WLAN API set. This is the API set which is being used by all the applications that Noel pointed out, which is the inbuilt UI, the command line interface, the media center UI. They all are working on top of this API set. It's a fairly rich API set because it allows you to interact with the service and the driver layer to control them. And most of the APIs are really around connection, configuration, and security. There is also a rich notification API set, so we are actually bubbling up a lot of state information up to the applications, a lot of media information up to the applications, so that you can probably write more wireless aware applications using these APIs. So what I'm going to do here is very quickly switch back to my demo machine, and so what I did was I wrote another application which is built on top of the WLAN API set. So if you don't like the UI that we ship with Vista, if you don't like its capabilities, is it visible? Yeah, okay. So if you don't like the capabilities of the UI, or if you don't like the UI just in general, you can write your own. Let me make sure I can move this stuff here. Okay. So I apologize for the low font. I can't seem to figure out a way to increase the font for this guy. So anyway, if you look at the app, this is very much like some of the apps that you've seen out there, like KissMac or NetStumbler or AP GUI. So essentially, it's showing all the access point networks, all the networks which are out there at the detail of access points. So what you see here, for instance, are 3 adapters. I really doubt if you can read it from there, but what you see here is I have 3 adapters on my machine. I have an onboard Intel 3945 mini PCI NIC. I have a USB NIC, which is an engineering sample from Marvell.